Hey, good morning, all. Welcome to the Common Good Podcast. It's Monday, June 28th, and summer feels in full swing. I hope you're feeling that way. Doug Pagitt here. I'm actually not in Minneapolis, where I often am for these podcasts. I am on Long Island in New York, and really excited today to be talking with Nanci Palacios and Laura Peniche. They are people who are part of an effort that Vote Common Good has been a part of as well. It's called the Fast for Freedom. It's asking our politicians to take seriously the call to change our immigration system, to change our immigration laws, to make a change immediately in this current Congress, in this current month, in this current week. We're asking them to make changes in how we're treating our essential workers, DACA recipients, people who are here on other kinds of visas. All of this part of what's been a far too long coming change in an immigration program. Part of the way that's happening is asking faith leaders to fast. So Laura is on here. A few weeks ago, she was someone who was fasting, and Nanci is part of the groups that's helping to organize this with Faith in Florida and Faith in Action. All right, Laura, hey, can I start with you and ask how your fast went, and give us a little context as to why you did it. Why did you feel it was important to say that you will go a number of days without food intentionally with a group of people all in Washington, D.C.? I know you live in Colorado and do your work in Colorado, but you went to Washington, D.C. to sit with others and not eat and to make an intentional statement to fast. Can you tell us how that went and why that was important for you?
Sure. Thank you, Doug. First of all, I have a background as well as a yoga instructor. And that's how I learned about using fasting as a way to cleanse the body. So I've done fasting before, but not for justice purposes. So when I heard of this opportunity that faith leaders from all over the country were gathering in Washington, D.C. to do a fast, to ask for immigration reform and to ask for our Congress to create a path to citizenship in the infrastructure package, which would be a more rapid way to obtain relief for people like me with DACA or essential workers or TPS holders. I thought it was a fabulous idea and great opportunity. Personally, I have lived in the country here in Colorado for about 24 years, undocumented, and I know the hardships of not having citizenship or a permanent protection. I am fighting for my mother, who is currently on the other side of the border, waiting to be reunited here with her children. And I've also recently lost my father to cancer, and he was an essential worker of this country for more than 24 years. And I wanted to go to DC and tell my dad's story and let Congress know why this is such an urgent issue.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for doing that. Thank you for your story. Hey, Nanci, you do organizing like this. So you do it in Florida. You do it with the group Faith in Action, which has affiliates all over the country. Can you talk a little bit about why this is so important for people everywhere in the country to think about it? It's easy for some people to think, well, I don't know, maybe immigration is a Washington, D.C. and the states that border Mexico problem. But maybe other people feel like they don't need to be thinking about it quite so much.
Yes, thank you so much, Doug. And so I myself am also a DACA recipient and was undocumented until I was 23 when DACA happened. My parents are still essential workers who are undocumented and have been waiting for a pathway to citizenship now for over 26 years. And so I have been able to organize communities all throughout Florida and supporting folks who are doing organizing across the country. And the urgency in every state of people that I talk to is the same. People are hoping and have been working to be able to elect leaders that would finally deliver a pathway to citizenship for them. The reality of our people in every state is that they have faced this pandemic, having to work, not having another choice, exposing themselves throughout the entire COVID crisis, and still having to show up to work with no real relief. And as we're meeting with members of Congress in DC during this fast, they want to hear from people in their district. So as much as we are here fasting and we have folks from different areas, it is just as important for folks who are not fasting here, who are back home, maybe doing solidarity fast or actions or just reaching out to their members of Congress, for them to relate those stories. Because at the end of the day, these members of Congress represent those communities. They want to hear from people in their communities. So I think it's a both and, just as urgent as we're drawing through this fast, the moment that we're in, creating that urgency, saying that like folks have waited long enough and that we know that there is a pathway to citizenship through the infrastructure bill, that we can actually achieve it finally, right? That we've been over 30 years waiting for a pathway to citizenship, that it can be done through the urgency of the fast. I think folks back home not just have the responsibility, but have the opportunity to also hold their members of Congress accountable.
Yeah, Nancy, that feels like such an important point, that it's been a long time that we have not had pathways to citizenship. There's a lot of people who say, I hear it from them regularly, like, hey, everybody should just follow the rules. Like, why are people coming in the country when they can't become a citizen? Or why don't they just cross the border in a way that makes sense? And my opinion is because there is no way that makes sense, because a pathway to citizenship is convoluted. It's a curvy path that just runs into dead ends all over. And there's really not a clear, clean way. And the dirty truth is this has been the case in the United States from its inception. We tell ourselves that this is a country that is made of immigrants, and we all know the benefits of people coming from all over the world and making up a people here. We've made it hard on people to be immigrants for the period of this country's history, and particularly difficult in the last 30 years. Laura, can you say a little something about what a DACA recipient is? A lot of us hear that word. It's become part of the phrases that you use when you talk about immigration. But I don't know that everyone understands what a stop hold it was meant to be, and why it is that we need to move to something more permanent and not just keep the deferral project going on. So can you say a bit about what DACA is and why we should make a change?
Sure. The DACA program was created during I think it was during the second administration of the Obama administration. It was created because undocumented youth really took up the initiative to come out, share their stories, and no longer be afraid, and really press our government into creating a solution, a protection, because many people who grew up undocumented in this country, like myself, who knew no other home other than this country, we really needed a protection to have lives, to be able to go to school, to be able to go to work. So the DACA program gives me, DACA stands for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It gives me a 2-year protection that says I shouldn't be a priority for deportation. This also gives me the ability to get a work permit and a social security number, which is not to be used for public benefits, but it is to be used to obtain a driver's license, for example. And this is a permit I need to renew every 2 years. I have to pay $500 and go through the biometrics process. And it is, it's not permanent. I have heard of people losing their DACA because they got a DUI or something like that, for example. So you do have to have a moral, outstanding character in order to keep this protection, which is not permanent.
That's right, and it's not permanent. And frankly, it's even the title, which is has a very government title to it, right? First of all, it's an acronym, DACA, and then Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, meaning it's just deferring the deportation action. It's not moving someone to a place where they can fully participate. And then it does this rather cruel thing, it seems to me. It says, hey, we will let you work here. We will demand that you pay taxes, but you don't get to use that social security number to reap the benefit of those FICA taxes that you pay down the road. So we're doing something, all these patchworks with our immigration system. And a lot of activists, you all personally, you've been doing this work in your organizing. Laura, you've been doing it not only in organizing, but also as a filmmaker, which I wanted to ask you about here in a minute. So people have been doing this work and like demanding for DACA to be extended. A really important thing that people did during the Trump administration. Great fear that they were going to abandon the DACA commitments. But that makes people feel like DACA is a solution, right? It makes people feel like, oh, DACA is the real good thing. Like we need to keep DACA. It's a Band-Aid. It's a little temporary carryover to protect a wound. It's not designed to be the solution. What this Fast for Freedom is really calling for is to solve this problem, right? To not just keep DACA going perpetually, because, Laura, as you said, it doesn't really provide all that it needs to. How are you feeling about where things sit right now? Be as blunt, be as hopeful, be as optimistic, or as straight talking as you want. Nanci, how are you feeling about where Congress is on this? And are they going to solve this problem as they take up the infrastructure bill?
Yes. So definitely DACA is not a straight pathway. It doesn't have a pathway to citizenship. There's not as many protections as one would hope, and it's not permanent, like you said. And so this moment of the fast has really brought different people together who have been kind of on the line of waiting, DACA recipients being some of them, TPS holders who have also kind of been like on a permit by permit basis, and then essential workers, right, who haven't had any protection and have been given this title of essential during the pandemic, but yet are kind of forgotten, right? Once we're asking for something, it's kind of like, not right now. So I feel hopeful of the moment that we're in because of the momentum that this fast has allowed for us to build upon the stories of especially essential workers who have kind of been forgotten throughout the aftermath of how we're coming out of the pandemic, right? And however, I do believe that we have told stories in a way that is capturing people's attention. While we have been here at the fast, we've been able to get some visits from members of Congress who have been champions of our families, and we've been able to learn a little bit of the process of like how to be able to get through the infrastructure bill and some of the obstacles that we might come upon right now that they're trying to reach a bipartisan deal that most likely won't include immigrant families. And I think that the trust that I have or the hopefulness that I have is in the people who have been doing this work for years, endlessly and tirelessly. Not so much on the elected officials because they can do what they want, but I do believe that our people can move people through their stories and through their actions. And I think that is the moment that we're in, right? That is the moment where we have to just go all in. We know that we have a limited amount of time to be included in the infrastructure program package, and that this month is so urgent, which is why the fast was planned around it. We know that members of Congress were in negotiations around it throughout the month of June, and that they're going back to recess in the first 2 weeks of July. And so that's why actions are going to be taking place back home. So we're very clear of the process. And I trust that. I trust that we are going all in to do what we need, lifting up the stories of our people and creating the urgency of this moment by holding folks accountable and making sure that they deliver to everyone that has been waiting for years.
Yeah, and look, it's good. It's important to raise that issue because politicians will tell you all the time, "Hey, I can't get anything done that the people in my district don't support," especially people that are congressmen, right? And if you're a senator, you would say people that are in my state. I have to represent the people of my state. So they kind of put it off on the people. And then you say to people, "Hey, we should rally around changing our immigration laws." And they'll say, "Well, that seems to be a politician's problem." And you can feel it happen in politics when there's this passing of the responsibility from one to the other. And so as citizens, I think you're really doing the right thing here by raising the awareness and saying, we as citizens are asking for this change. And I'll just say to anybody who's listening or watching this, if you don't know and understand all that there is about our immigration program and process in the United States, welcome. No one seems to. You can talk to the most experts of experts on immigration, and they will all use a phrase like, it's very complicated. It's not a straight path. There's many programs. It is a mess. So you don't have to know a lot about it. You don't have to know what TPS stands for, temporary. What does it stand for? It stands for temporary.
Temporary protective status.
Thank you, protective status. Like, you don't have to know insider language. What we do know is that we need to give people a pathway to become citizens. And there's a backlog of hundreds of thousands of DACA people and millions of others who just can't access a way to becoming citizens. So I hope that you'll become an activist, anybody who's listening to this. And you can do it professionally the way Nanci and Laura do, or you can do it in some other ways. Do you have some ideas for people? Nanci, I know you have to go in a couple of minutes, so I'll ask you this, because then Laura, I want to talk to you about your filmmaking process as well, and how you've engaged in this as an artist and a filmmaker and a storyteller. But Nanci, what else can people do if they're saying to themselves, yeah, I've been hearing about this for a long time. I actually feel hopeful that maybe the Biden administration and the control of the Senate being with Democrats and the House being in the hands of Democrats, maybe something can get done here. Maybe we have this short window. What can they do to put pressure on their elected officials at the federal level?
Yes. So I would say that folks can definitely make calls to their members of Congress. They can write emails. They can use social media to tweet at them and do actions through the different social media platforms. Many folks are going to be organizing actions in district, like I said, for the next 2 weeks as members of Congress are coming home, which means they will be in your district. They are normally in DC, right, because of the voting and everything that happens. But for the next 2 weeks, they will be home. Many of them tend to have town halls or some form of like interaction or space for their constituents to just relate to them. What are some of their concerns? I want to invite all of you who are listening to make sure you take advantage of that. If you have never done it, it's just as easy as saying, hey, my name is Nanci. I live in in your district. I want to make sure that you're supporting a pathway to citizenship for families. I know X amount of people in my community who would really, really benefit from that. They have to take all of that into consideration. All of those things are what got us to be able to achieve DACA. It was the pressure of the community and many other programs. And I know that that is what's going to get us to victory. There are many members of Congress, especially including Democrats, who many times have told us, we're with you. We believe in a pathway to citizenship. This is a time to hold them accountable, to deliver, and there is a process and a way that they can do it. And we can't let our guard down, right? I think that there are so many people in our communities who are directly impacted, whose stories, if this is all confusing to you, create a space to listen to their stories. I always say that no one leaves a land that they're living well in to be able to go somewhere where they don't want you, where the language is not even your language, where everyone is trying to get rid of you, where you're not having any kind of protection, but it's somehow better than where you were, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think it's time, and we owe it, especially to essential workers who have kept us going through this pandemic, to finally deliver a pathway to citizenship. Yeah. And there'll be millions of people who will be covered if we do that. And I hope everyone really does that and invites friends and family to do that. We have that responsibility to look out for each other.
And Nanci, just to ask you to say another word or two about it, it does help when people call their congressperson, right? And it does help when they send a letter. People might think like, oh my gosh, it's like calling into my insurance company, but I'm going to call the federal government. They don't care. Or, one of those voicemails that say, hey, would you stay on after this interaction with your customer service person and give us the survey. So people just so often feel like, I'm not going to waste my time calling into some call center. Give us the encouragement that this really does work.
It does work. And I'll tell you why. We've been making calls while fasters have been here in the last 3 weeks. They have been making calls to their members of Congress. That is, when you have an 8 all day, we got to find some way to keep us busy, right? That is one of the reasons why some of the members of Congress decided to come and actually meet with the fasters last week. We had Representative Joaquin Castro come and meet with them. We had Representative Omar from Minnesota SEPTA delegation, among many others. So they do listen. Whenever you're calling into their office, they have to record every call that comes in, whether it's for or against something that you like. And just like as you're calling to support immigration reform or some form of protection for immigrants, there's people actively calling for other reasons, right? Something that's happening in their community, and they have to make a note of all of that. If they hear from enough people, they have to pay attention to it. And that is what we're trying to do with this fast and with the different actions that are happening. They have to listen, right? They have to take direction from their constituents. And it's far more powerful if they're hearing from people who directly live in their district and have stories to share of experiences, right? And it's not just statistics, but it's the reality of their stories. All of that moves hearts and minds.
Yeah. And at this point, Nanci, what's being talked about here is a pathway to citizenship for the people who are in the country currently, right? We're going to be doing an effort at Vote Common Good where we're going to ride bicycles from San Diego to St. Augustine, Florida, to raise issues of our border and to do storytelling about people who are impacted in the borderlands and with our border policy, in addition to immigration policy. But what's going on right now, for people who need to know, these are people that are currently living in the United States, DACA recipients, people who are here on temporary visas, people that are in the country without documentation because their visas have expired. If that's important to you, that like, well, I don't know, can we take in more people in our country? That's not what this is about. Right now, this is about making sure people that are here can fully and completely live in the United States society legally, who can participate in all aspects of our society. So if you're someone who hears in the back of your mind, or you hear someone say to you in your life or on your television screen, we need laws, so we need people to follow laws. That's what people are trying to do, right? They really are trying to follow the laws, and the laws don't work, or worse yet, the laws don't exist. So what Nanci and Laura and all the others are saying, as I'm hearing it anyway, correct me if I'm wrong, but is we need laws. We need laws that are in place that allow people to become citizens and function fully in our society. So even if you're in that, that side that says we really want to make sure that we're following the laws that exist in this country, but that's something we need to make happen in the laws that currently exist.
Yes, and there are folks who have been here for over 20 years, right? You're talking about people who have contributed to this country and have made the country the way that it is through their contributions for over 20, 15, 10, 30 years. We haven't reformed or changed the immigration laws to even allow people to come here legally in over 30 years. And unless we address that eventually, right, then we're going to keep having people travel because people are having to leave their home countries all the time. We are talking about folks who are here now, though, and folks who have gone to school with your kids, who have worked with you, who are in your communities and your congregations. That is what we're advocating for right now. We want to be seen, we want to be accepted, and we want to be protected in this moment.
Nanci, I know you have to go. Thank you so much for all of your work. We'll put in the show notes in the list here, all that. And Laura, if you can stick around, I'd love to talk to you about the other way you're approaching this activism. So Nanci, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Laura, your pedigree is interesting, right? So you work with this group called Together in Colorado, and you yourself, as you said, are a DACA recipient, but you're also somebody who's a yoga instructor, and you're a filmmaker. That's a lot of pieces. Before we get into all the immigration-related parts to that, say a little bit about why you're involved in so many areas of life and so many disciplines and involved in so many different kinds of ways of engaging in our world.
That's a good question. I've never been asked that question before, so I appreciate it. I remember since I was little, I was a storyteller. And I learned that from my parents. We didn't have cable TV or anything like that, so storytelling was a way that how our parents kept our imagination engaged, and to be able to pass down stories that were important and meaningful. So I remember one of the reasons why I wanted to come to this country was to pursue a career in Hollywood and be a filmmaker. And and that really brought me here personally. But once I was here in this country and growing up undocumented in Colorado, I really did face a lot of challenges in becoming the person that I wanted to become. It seemed like I didn't have the same opportunities that my friends in school had. Um, I would get offers for fellowships or other interesting opportunities for writing or filmmaking, which I had to turn down because of my status. So eventually I started a family here in Colorado and started to have children. And that really put me in a different place because I started to feel worried and scared of what might happen if my immigration status would put me into jeopardy of being separated from my children because of deportation, um, which is why I was so grateful when DACA came out. And I wish I was one of those kids who were shouting out on the streets, undocumented, unafraid, who really made this change happen. But I was really scared. I was in a different place before. I didn't want to share my story. I didn't want to tell anybody I was
Oh.
undocumented.
Uh-huh.
Um, and and that put me in a weird place because I didn't know what to do. I just had to be isolated with my children. And that's how I kind of got connected to the world of yoga. And I took the training to become a yoga instructor mainly because I wanted to find a way for myself to stay healthy. Um, it, because living without documentation, it's difficult. You're under stress all the time. You're afraid all the time. And eventually that will take a toll on your body. Your body will suffer from living with chronic stress and chronic anxiety. And that's why I wanted to learn how to take care of myself on my own and started doing the yoga path. Um, but eventually I reached to a point where I just couldn't focus on anything else because it seems like not having citizenship was a big challenge for me and my children. And I felt an urgent call to get involved in community and do what I could, put my little grain of sand to make something change in this country because I knew I was not the only one in this situation. I knew that millions of families all over the country are suffering same things that I am. And so that's why I wanted to join full-time community organizing for immigrant rights. And I started using my background as storyteller and writer to work on other projects, such as writing with Modus Theater, which is a Boulder nonprofit arts organization that works with community members to create monologues so we can have a platform to tell our story. So I started doing that and also working with Together Colorado, which is a nonpartisan, multi-faith community grassroots organization working on immigration issues here in our state. And eventually I landed on my current job, which is I'm a hotline manager with Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition. We document ICE activity here in Colorado so we can understand how ICE works. And if you don't know what ICE means, it's Immigration Customs Enforcement. And it's important to watch them and see how they're operating so we can better inform our community and also create legislation here in Colorado that can help protect our families.
Well, that is such a fascinating story. Thank you for sharing it. I just think about all the ways that some people might think your mind is being pulled, right? You're a parent, you have your own concerns about policies that are impacting your life. You're thinking about being a yoga instructor, you're making films, you're running a hotline. But that's just what you call your life, I'm guessing. That's just like you're just like, no, that's just the brain of Laura right there. All of that's in there, and it's going to be happening anyway. And is that right? Like you would be doing this internally, thinking about all these things, and you're just finding a way to make sure that that's part of your work life and your activism life and your just daily life.
Yes, I feel like I'm living the dream, honestly. I'm using storytelling to create a positive impact and a change in our communities. So I never imagined I would end up working with with community organizations and working with community organizing. I never imagined that. I had different plans and different ideas. However, you're right. Like, if I wasn't working on immigrant rights, I would constantly be worried about what's happening, not knowing how to take action. And so being fully involved has been helpful for my own well-being, because I have more peace of mind knowing that I'm doing my best every day to to change the circumstances that are affecting me personally and so many other people.
So in 2011, you made a film, a documentary called "No One Shall Be Called Illegal." Tell us a little bit about that film, and you made that as before DACA was a thing. Is that right? I mean, DACA was being talked about as an executive action that the president was going to use to protect childhood arrivals. Tell us about that film.
While I was still learning in at film school, I was still learning about documentary filmmaking. I I got really inspired by Colorado documentarians who were telling stories of civil rights and those important stories that people usually don't seek because they're not for entertainment, they're for educational and informational purposes. And so I fell in love with this craft or documentary filmmaking, and I wanted to be able to tell my story in a way that would be safe enough, even though I don't know what that means, because telling your story when you have absolutely no protection can be really scary, very risky. And I remember I didn't know anybody else who was undocumented and at that time, and who was also a student. I was looking for a college student that would be willing to tell their story and say, hey, I'm here, I'm going to college here, I matter. And so it was hard to try to recruit people to help me on this project because people were worried that we would put someone in danger. So I ended up being like a one-person crew. I ran the camera, the sound, and I edited the film myself. And like I said, I didn't know anybody at that time. So I asked my brother, who at that time was enrolled in community college, and I asked him to do this project with me. It was just for school. Nobody else will see it. And he said, great, let's do it. And he was brave enough to come out and tell his story. I protected his name, and I never told anybody that he was my brother. And so when people would watch the film at school, they really didn't know that was my brother on the screen. And the film turned out to be a big hit, and it got picked up later to play at the Denver Stars International Film Festival here in Denver. And that was a dream come true to see my brother telling his story on the big screen. And I had to tell him. I said, look, brother, I'm sorry, but your film was on a big screen on the film festival. And he was surprised, but he said, yeah, you know what, I had a dream that my story was being played on a big screen. And wow. I don't know, him telling me that he had that dream, and I told him the revelation, it made me feel like that was meant to be. We were doing the right thing. and sharing our stories. And now we are both storytellers with Modus Theater. My brother is actually now working for Modus Theater as a project manager, and we have both wrote monologues, and which we have shared in both statewide as well as national platforms. So
Amazing.
it's been an amazing journey.
Yeah, yeah. So grateful that you did that. People are told to stay in the shadows, and the way that people who don't have the legal documentation to live and work in the country survive is to keep their heads down, stay in the shadows, and stay quiet. It's part of the reason why people put up with it and tolerate it, right? There's all this shunning and silence around it. So for you and other documentarians, which maybe you helped start that movement because there's been a lot of documentaries about people living in that situation, you did just the opposite of that. Like, you pointed lights at it and shined a camera at it and then said to people, look at this and watch it. And then they did. And I think that alternative way to deal with the oppressive narratives around people that don't have legal documentation yet to live in this country. That's the way we're going to change this thing, right? Is that we're going to just do the opposite of what the oppressive system is saying that you must do. And for some people, that means, I don't know, breaking the law or doing civil disobedience or something. And for others, it means agitating in the streets. And for others, it means telling the stories in a way that people aren't supposed to tell the story. Was that part of what people connected to in your film, No One Shall Be Called Illegal, was that it felt like you were breaking those rules and breaking that silence?
I believe so. And it is also, there's also something about media and news outlets often giving a portrayal of what an undocumented immigrant is. So I grew up hearing stories of who I was supposed to be in the news, and they often had it wrong. They were often picturing this character who was not really human. And so to me, it was really important to show the human behind the title, and for people who were back then using the term illegal aliens to see that we're human beings and we're just like you with dreams, and we're not people you should be afraid of, that you should be constantly trying to kick out. But we're just here seeking an opportunity to be ourselves, and to give the gifts that we have brought as well.
So that was 10 years ago, which might be hard for you to believe that was 10 years ago that the film came out. And then you were involved in another film as a producer called Five Dreamers. Do you want to say a little bit about that film as well?
Yes, Five Dreamers is a documentary film that has aired on PBS in many different states in the country. And I wanted to be a producer again for this film because I knew that these stories are not being told enough. And at a time where people have often picked up the term dreamer and used it as a political game, because people will advocate for dreamers and maybe support a legislation that can give a path to citizenship to dreamers. But they're not talking about the parents of dreamers. And one of the reasons we created this film, Five Dreamers, was so that we could talk beyond dreamers. In this film, we have 5 people from Colorado who at that time had a DACA status, just like me. And they're talking about what it's like to have DACA and the importance of DACA. But they're also talking about their parents and saying, hey, we're a whole family. You can't just protect one of us, but leave everybody else behind. And our parents are the original dreamers. And thanks to our courageous parents, we are here, we're alive, we're safe, and we have a good education. We have good lives. And so it is not fair for us as as dreamers or DACA recipients to only advocate for ourselves. We have to do it for our whole families.
And now you're in that very situation where you have children of your own, and your concern is that the federal government could make a decision to remove you from the country, and there's really no care or consideration for what happens to your kids. Like, that's your problem to figure out if they're going to deport you. Your children are American citizens, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, so they would just say, well, we're going to separate your family. We've all watched family separations happen at the border when people come to the border seeking refugee status or asylum seeking status, and they're separated right then, and we scream in outrage about it. But every time someone who's lived in this country and has children is removed, we're separating families. It's just the reality of what is happening, and to my mind, for absolutely no reason, good or benefit at all. Nothing in the country is made better by removing someone from the country who's lived here for. I won't even put a number of hours on it or years on it. There's just nothing good that comes when we do that. Like, country's just one less person who wants to be here and wants to contribute to the goodness of this country. Are you willing to say a little bit about your own family and why your parents chose to come to the United States and what that was like for you? Are you comfortable talking about that part of your story?
Yes. And first of all, I thank you for touching that point of family separation. That's a really big motive for me to do the work I do, because family separation does happen at the border, like you mentioned, but I have also seen immigration status being used against families within our court systems, in which a judge will give a parent who has citizenship the custody of the children because they know the other parent does not have permanent status. And then that creates another barrier and another way to separate families as well. I've seen so much family separation in the interior of the country, and we're not at the border, and yet families continue to get separated all the time. So thank you again for bringing that up. And my family, as I mentioned, we've been here for more than 24 years, and we left Mexico because at the time when we were living there, my father was really concerned about our safety as children. We would often hear stories in the news about children that would go missing, a lot of kidnappings happening. And this is something that my father was constantly worried about. On top of not being able to provide everything that he needed to for his family because of the lack of opportunity, the lack of jobs that can pay a fair wage for my dad to have enough money to support his family. We were really escaping extreme poverty. I always share the story of how we couldn't even afford toilet paper. And that's a luxury that Americans have and that you take for granted. But I don't take it for granted because I didn't grow up with toilet paper, or I didn't grow up with other luxuries like having running water on your tab 24/7. Those are things that I don't know, pushed us to seek a better life. So we came here and we quickly found a home here and made a life here, and our lives just became much better, even though we were in the hiding. But it was still better because my dad was able to have a job and to be able to provide us with basic necessities. And more importantly, we felt like we were safe, like we could go to the park and play with other kids, and we didn't have to constantly be worried about something bad happening to us.
And is it okay? Is it okay if I ask how did you come into the country? What was the mechanism that you came into the United States?
We crossed walking, and we just we just walked north and came here. We had people that we knew here in Colorado, so we knew we wanted to come to Colorado. But
do you remember how far you walked? I mean, you were a little girl at that time. Do you remember that actual process, or was that part of the stories that your family had to tell you because you're so young?
I was 13 years old. I was the oldest of my siblings, so I do have really good memories of that experience. Um, I, I remember we walked for about 3 hours one night, but we got picked up by Border Patrol trying to walk, and we got sent back that same night. So in that process of getting sent back, we met a young man who was like in his 20s, I remember. But he said he had a house right on the other side of the border, and that he kept getting deported, but that his house was on this side of the border, so he kept coming back. And he told us he must have felt compassion for us because my dad was a young man with children traveling. So he showed us the way on how to cross on a way that would be a little bit easier. He showed us like where his house was, and we were able to come back with him because he was coming back to his house the very next day. And that was the first time that someone from this country helped us out. And it always amazes me how lucky we've been. Ever since our first journey, we were lucky enough that nothing bad happened to us, that we were able to make it here safely. But we've had nothing but good people reach out to us and extend a helping hand.
Laura, I'm guessing you're older now than your dad was. Was your mom traveling with you at that time as well?
She did not. She joined us later.
Okay, so you're probably older now than your dad was when he made this journey. Can you imagine doing what your dad did? Can you imagine taking having a 13-year-old and younger kids and having to travel into a country you haven't been in before? How does that strike you now that you're the adult, in this part of the story and thinking about that?
I have even more respect now that I'm a parent for my father, knowing how scary that must have been for him. Yet he showed us that he was faithful. He had faith on this journey. He often prayed during the journey, and we never felt like we were alone in our journey or that we were in danger. It felt like we were part of this adventure, and that we knew we were doing the right thing for ourselves. And I remember just my father was loving and always kept us really well protected, and he did what he could. He would sometimes even carry both of my siblings on his arms as he was walking. And I remember seeing his feet bleeding from thorns and bushes that he was stepping on, and yet he would not complain. He would just keep walking, knowing that he was doing something good for his family. But I also recognized that he was very young. He was about 33 years old when he came here, and just the way he described it, he talked about it, I don't think he knew the implications of what he would face legally once he made that journey. And I often think of how young he was and his like background and level of education. He barely finished high school when he was in Mexico, and very quickly he got married, and then he started working to try to provide for his family. And so I often see that people who come here without status, there's also a lack of education in the law and how the law works. And so I don't know. I think of my father as that innocence in him, not knowing what he was getting himself to, but just having faith that he felt he was doing something good for his children.
And this is a big piece of the story. When you talk to people who are coming from Central America, especially, and Mexico, they often feel that, like, this is an act of faith. They feel God is calling them to save their family and go to the United States. In the other work that you do you hear those stories regularly as well from people that, from their vantage point, it's not about laws or breaking the law or a broken immigration system in our country of the United States? They're saying, no, God wants me to save my family, and I will do what I have to do to save my family. And that really collides with the people in the United States who think that their faith drives them to say to people, don't come here, because by doing so, you'd be violating the law. And it just feels like the Christian story over and over, where some people are trying to maintain a legal system and some people are trying to protect and save humanity. And it's just that story that feels like it's playing out over and over. Do you find that often in the stories that you that you meet of people who are coming here, that they feel spiritually called to save their family and come to the United States in the way to do that?
I do see that a lot. I've heard of many miracles at the border and things that have happened because people had faith. People prayed and their lives were saved. This also happened to us at the border, where we were in difficult situations, but keeping faith and continuing to act with faith really helped us so much. And that really shaped me as well. Like, I would say my crossing experience here really shaped me as a person of faith and strengthened my faith. But I would also say that this country has put out a message out to the world saying we are a country, one nation under God, where everyone is equal. And so I know that when I was coming here, that's what my family knew, that this was the country of opportunity. This was a country of God, a country of freedom. And so I think we need to uphold that promise. And I often wonder, if we're one nation under God, why can't we treat our siblings who are immigrants and refugees with more respect or more dignity and more love?
Yeah. I think that's the question we all need to ask ourselves, Laura. Thank you. Hey, we are. I mentioned earlier that we're organizing this 67-day journey from California to Florida, traveling along the border to tell stories of the people we meet. So that starts in September and runs through the beginning of November. So, Laura, if you ever have interest in joining us on any part of that, I would love to keep up with you about that. And we want to bear witness and tell the stories of the people that we're talking about, like your family and those who work to make that entry and that experience something that's good and life-giving. So that's what we're going to be doing. I'd love to have you be part of that in any way that you want to.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Doug. And thank you for all you do as well to help us tell our stories and just help us talk about this. It's such an important issue.
Well, very, very good, Laura. So as you heard Nanci say, be in touch with your congressperson. If you don't know how to do that, you can follow the hashtag #WeAreEssential. You can also go to Fast for Freedom. You can look that up. Faith in Action, Vote Common Good, any of those places where you connect with any of this, and you can find the places to get the information about reaching out to your congressperson and to your senator. So, Laura, thank you so much for being with us. We really do appreciate the beauty of which you tell your story and for sharing it with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
You bet. All right. Hey, we'll see you tomorrow when it's going to be Tuesday in Politics on the Common Good podcast.